So I'll start the recording now, but this is 5 quotes to flip your classroom. Um, and I'm going to screen share, so you should be able to see my screen here. Is everyone seeing the 5 ways to flip your classroom main slide here?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Um, are you seeing the GoToWebinar control panel on the right still too, or no?
There are
Yes.
four little boxes up there.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just move this out of the way. All right, so this again is 5 ways to flip your classroom, or 5 quotes to flip your classroom. Um, So the first quote that I'm going to mention is one of my own, and I think it's really important when from a teaching perspective, and that's to be structured, to be flexible. And this sounds a little bit like, a contradiction here. If I'm structured, how am I flexible? Are they going to work together? But what you'll see is that if you're thinking about what you're going to do and how you want to do it, whether it's online or in person, um, if you have a plan and you have some structure, it's easier to adapt. It's easier to be flexible. It's easier to change because I need to get the student from A to B, and how I get them down that path can change because I know where I'm going. I know what the outcomes are. I know what the structure needs to be. And our structure, of course, starts with the competencies that we need to be teaching the students, but continues to go. There's little smaller components to it as we move along. So I want to share with you guys a story from my teaching experience. This was probably my first year of teaching. I think it was my second semester, and I was doing this activity that I thought it was an in-person class. It was a fun. It was interactive. It was engaging. We were learning about the brain, and in this process, um, I asked them, "Have you ever burned your hand?" And everyone, pretty much everyone in the class would raise their hand. We've all burned ourselves somehow, just not being careful. And I said, "Well, when you burned yourself, did you move your hand first or did you feel the pain first?" And the way the brain works is normally for most people, you will actually move your hand before you even feel the pain. So I had them analyze, why did that happen? What was going on inside your nervous system, your central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system, all these different components. And they were having fun. They were passing koosh balls around and demonstrating it in like a human model. So they were actually physically like being these neurons. And I'm like, great, this was fun. It was great. I had a student come up to me after class, and this was a student who I later found out had just gotten out of prison. And he looked like he had just gotten out of prison. I shouldn't be judging them, but just to set the scene, I was a little intimidated. I'm a newer teacher. This student comes up, very intimidating, and he goes, "What the hell am I supposed to be learning in this class?" And you can imagine, I'm already a little intimidated by it. My reaction was to get defensive, but I didn't. I was able to control myself and say, "Oh, what do you mean? What's going on?" And we had some conversation and some discussion. And what it showed me was um, I wasn't doing a good enough job of demonstrating. We were having fun, we were engaged, but we weren't making the connections. So I had this flexibility in my teaching style, but I didn't necessarily have the structure of knowing I want them to get to this outcome, to get to this thing. I knew it in my head, but I hadn't set it up for the students. I hadn't made that clear to them what that outcome was, what that structure was. So that's the first quote. And in this idea, we have to first start to analyze when we're thinking about the outcomes. What do they need to know versus what is nice to know? And I steal this term from a book called Understanding by Design by a couple of authors named McTighe and Wiggins. One of them recently actually just passed away, but they wrote this book with the idea being that when you create a lesson or you're creating some teaching opportunity or teaching engagement, lesson plan, whatever you want to call it, we have to know where we're going in the end. And we can design the course to help the students learn and understand what we're trying to teach them along the way if we know what they need to know and we don't get bogged down by this nice to know. So again, when we start with the need to know, you always want to start with thinking about the competencies and then break that down further. And I always say, especially if it's an in-person class, for every hour I teach, I'm thinking about 3 big concepts that I want them to know. If I go beyond that, odds are they're not going to remember it. And research supports that, if we show too much, their attention span isn't great enough that they're going to lose it. They're not going to remember it. They're not going to retain it. So focus on those 3 most important things for every hour that you're teaching. So if you're going to flip your classroom, because this is about flipping your classroom, it really requires some preparation. Because again, that quote is, be structured to be flexible. And to be structured, you have to prepare because you have to know where I'm going to go, what do they need to know versus what's nice to know, and how am I going to set up my lesson so that I ensure they get what they need to know, and I still have time to be flexible enough to throw in some of that nice to know when the opportunities come up. So I want to turn it to all of you for a minute. And I want you to think about what does it take to be successful in your classroom. And I'm actually going to put there's a link here, but I want you to use a different one because did this webinar once before, and I don't want you to get bogged down with all of their thoughts. So what I'm going to do is put a link in the chat. It's a Google Doc, and I'd like you to just, once I get it up in here, there we go. I'm going to ask you to just go right in there and start typing away. So again, the Google Doc link is in the chat box now. So you just click right, if you on your GoToWebinar control panel, if you click the chat button, you'll see a link here for the Google Doc, and you can go there, and it's the first page will be what does it take to be successful in your classroom. And you should be able to directly type right on here. So yeah, we have an anonymous turtle already started.
So where it says questions chat, is that where I'm going?
Yep, there should be a spot where it says questions or chat, and if you go right down there.
That one, enter a question.
What's that?
Is it the box that says enter a question for staff?
There should be a box that says chat.
Yeah, I see questions or chat, but it's got listed degrees, talk, and then a smaller box underneath for questions.
I know. I have a slightly different control panel because I'm the organizer. Can I ask whoever is our anonymous turtle who already got started?
Yeah, it's in that question/chat area.
Okay.
It says degree talk because that's him as the moderator, and then it's got the little link to the doc, the Google Doc document.
Okay, I'm just going to type and see if it comes up. Just test. No, didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know where I'm supposed to be. Sorry.
I don't either, Trey.
All right. What I'm going to do instead then.
Oh, I see it.
You found
it?
it?
Listen. Yeah, this is what you have to do. Where are you? I got to go back to you though. I've lost you though. I'm back in. I'm actually in Google Doc. I'm in Google Docs. Oh man. I got to the page to type in, but I just lost my screen where you are. So that doesn't work. All right, I think I've got to go back somehow. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll talk and I don't type, but I got to go back and find you.
Yeah, let's. Since there's only three of us, why don't we just we'll talk about it, and I can type in your thoughts,
okay.
So that you can come back to this document if it's at a future reference point. That's part of the reason why we like to do it. I like to do it this way. So, what does it take to be successful in your classroom? And I think. Who was it here that said one needs to be an active and engaged participant in the process?
That would be me.
Kathy.
Kathy. All right. Other thoughts, Kathy?
Well, I just think that in order for those students who are most successful, the biggest process for them or the biggest thing is the fact that they showed up.
Definitely.
Well, that's a good thing.
Definitely. What about you, Tina? You said you were something you were trying to write in there, and.
Well, for me, I always find that it's good to engage students through humor, through stories, through instructor. I have a lot of energy, and I think that tends to get the students not only paying attention, but sort of motivate them to some extent. I encourage discussion through that. And I think drawing, because I'm a visual learner, drawing pictures sometimes through stories, using video, whatever it takes sort of is how I approach it.
Great. Peter, do you have anything you want to add?
The difficult thing about preparing with an online class is that somebody else prepares the lesson.
It's true.
And you get no input.
Oh, yeah.
And that to me is difficult. Because you want the students to learn certain things, so I'm prepared, but I can't give them anything. You know
Are
what
we
I'm
talking
saying?
online only here, or are we talking both online and on ground?
We are talking
No, online.
for a flipped classroom, the true model to work, it's going to be more on ground type setup. But we want to be able to, because we don't want to be limited here. If there's ways we can apply these ideas to the online environment, let's go
Okay.
for it. But yeah, this is going to be most useful for on ground because you can create. There's stuff you can create on your own and stuff you can do in person. So
And can I just add 2 cents to that?
yeah.
Who was that? I'm sorry. Who's the other gentleman?
Peter?
Peter. I agree with you. I actually designed 3 classes for Bay Path, and I'm designing another one. Just because I opened my big fat mouth when it came down to saying you're no longer going to be designing your own classes. And I agree, because one of the classes I recently taught online was a writing course that I didn't design, and I found it extraordinarily difficult to get through that 6 weeks, and it almost was. I got the worst reviews I ever received. I've always gotten positive reviews from students. I've always run a dynamic classroom, and I just got bad reviews because I was playing catch up with them. And I agree to some extent that that's a very difficult process to teach someone else's class.
It's not only difficult. The problem is it's to me it's hard to get across what you want them to learn about everything they're reading.
Right.
How can you give them the input that they really need to understand it clearly? I don't know how you do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm prepared, and I read the material, and they read the material, so hopefully we're both prepared, and that much works out.
And I could say maybe video would help with that. I don't know. I aim to do that more, but I'm not there yet.
Definitely. Yeah, and hopefully by the time, like I said, again, this is focused mainly on ground, but I think there's some ideas here that will work for online too, and there is some flexibility with what we can do. And actually this session, you've been given, for teaching online, you've been given a little more freedom than you had been before, because we've been hearing that feedback, that it's very difficult to teach someone else's class. Before you could provide feedback via obviously grading, announcements, email, stuff like that. But now you can actually add content as well. You can't change necessarily the assignments, but you can add your own content to the modules. So you can add, a lesson, whether it's video or a diagram or a PowerPoint or something like that, which can help with some of that need to have a little more say in things. So that is an option for this session, and then hopefully moving forward, assuming it works out okay. So
good.
So that was our first quote. Second quote is one I took from, he's an international trainer, well-known, named Dave Meyer, and he promotes this idea of accelerated learning, he calls it, which we do accelerated learning here. He takes it more from a corporate perspective, but his idea of don't do for the learners what they can do for themselves and each other works for any teaching environment. And actually, I've worked in therapeutic environments too, with teenagers struggling with depression and anxiety. And honestly, even in a therapy setting, don't do for them what they can do for themselves and each other. Because if you force the student, to take on that role of the learning, it requires them to engage. It requires them to take ownership. It empowers them to be the learner rather than just some passive vessel taking in this information. So don't do for them what they can do for themselves and each other. So what are we saying when we think that? Well, if you're creating a lesson plan for on ground, or if you're thinking about, what am I going to add to my lesson? I can't change the assignments, but what kind of content can I give them in an online environment? You want to think about Bloom's taxonomy. I want to make sure we're back on the slideshow. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Because I had one other time that didn't work, so I want to make sure that works. So when you think about Bloom's taxonomy, they can't understand before they remember. They can't apply before they understand. So we have to be able to move things up. If I jump right in, and this is true of the assignments, and if you see assignments in your online classes, for example, that you're like, wow, we're asking them to evaluate, but we don't even know if they remember. That's good feedback to give to your director to say, hey, I think this assignment isn't working, and this is why. And if you're creating these assignments for yourself, maybe it's for some in-class activities, keep this in mind. Help them understand and apply hopefully before they even come to class. They do that through the reading, maybe they do that through some preparation work, through some video watching, something like that, so that when you get to class, you can apply, you can analyze, you can evaluate with them in class. Okay? And again, you're not doing it for them. You're not telling them, well, here's how you apply, this concept. If you're teaching an English class, it's not, here's how you do a research paper, but it's, hey, here's an outline. How would you do a research paper given this situation? How would you apply these concepts that we've learned about in this situation? So you're letting them do the work, and then you're jumping in and debriefing, correcting, and delving deeper whenever it's appropriate. We can adjust a little bit here. So for that second quote, don't do for the learners what they can do for themselves and each other, it's important to remember that the flipped classroom requires student engagement. And I think we saw that when we were talking about, what does it take to be successful in your class? It requires that engagement. And whether it's you getting them engaged or them coming prepared and motivated and ready to go, or some combination of those two things, the more engaged they are, the more they're going to learn. There's all this research and there's all this just push to say what makes good teaching and what makes good learning. Well, if we really simplify it, engagement. You can't learn if you're not paying attention, right? So if we can get them engaged, we're going to have a much greater chance of helping them learn. All right, so we had 2 quotes so far. We had be structured to be flexible, and don't do for the learners what they can do for themselves and each other. The third one I want to mention is the variety is the spice of life. And that's William Cowper said that. So thinking about what you present outside of class, if you're adding stuff to the online environment or you're presenting information to your students before they show up on ground, what can you do to add some variety to that content? So I'm going to go back to that Google Doc that we had before, and I'll type in the answers as you guys talk. So how can you add variety to the content you present outside of class? And I'd like you to just shoot some ideas at me. What kind of variety, how are you presenting this information to your students?
I could utilize different resources and references, videos, different websites that they can get more detail on the information that we're talking about, articles from the library, things like that.
Great.
Because I teach. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go, Peter?
No, go ahead.
Because I teach communications, I generally refer, if I'm writing anything, I refer to anything in the real world or anything that people can see around them. What do you see about nonverbals? How are they displayed? How do they affect situations? Things along those lines. I'm not going to give you all the examples, but I sort of refer to looking at things in your world and around you, in the news, whatever.
Sure. And going back to what we were saying before, do you point it out for them, or do you ask them to point it out, or do a little bit of both?
It depends. I teach at 3 universities, so it differs. But in some instances, if it's like an online class, I sort of I'll sort of state it. Think about how you approach the situation, or look at this, or pay attention to this, or you'll start to notice as you're learning in here these different things and how people operate. In other instances, I may have students tell me, one student each class tell me what they saw out there and how they sort of recognize that communication is everywhere and that involves communication.
Definitely. Yeah, I like to just call that a scavenger hunt. And I just, like you said, you might give them an example to start with. Say, hey, here's what I mean by this. Here's nonverbal communication.
How cars communicate. How does a car communicate? Blinkers, lights, middle fingers,
Definitely. And then you send them out to find the examples, right? So again, it's going back to that don't do for the learners what they can do for themselves and each other. I could give them 100 examples, but if I give them 3 examples and let them find the other 97, it's much more powerful, right? So, right. And because you have a class of 15, 20, 25 students, the numbers grow significantly, because if each student only finds 5 examples, that's 50, 60, 70 examples right there. That because the whole class can work together to provide those examples. So that's a great way, the real world examples and getting them out and finding those.
Yep.
What else? What other ideas?
I think that the variety comes when they read different authors about the same subject.
Okay.
And that way they're getting lots of different points of view about that idea.
Yeah, that's important.
Definitely. Other thoughts on how you get the content to your students? Different ways we can provide variety.
Well, PowerPoint would be one way that would provide variety. Watching a movie.
Yeah, I use film. I use film and video.
Gotcha. Great. And there's more and more tools out there nowadays. I'm going to share with you one, Zaption, which allows you to take videos and add quizzes into the video. So like they watch 2 minutes of this video and then a quiz question pops up and you decide what that quiz question is going to be. It doesn't necessarily tie into Canvas and the gradebook and all that fun stuff, but it does require them to kind of just re-engage with it instead of saying, you know, having this video play in the background while they're really just looking at Facebook or something else, right? It forces them to re-engage. There's other tools out there too, like Socratic and Quizlet, which are other quizzing tools that, again, allow you to, you don't have to be there to do this component, but to say, hey, go take this Quizlet online, which is just a little game to help them reinforce and remember and understand those basic key concepts. So again, when we get to class, they have the remember, they have the understanding down at that lower level of Bloom's taxonomy. Now we can start to apply when they're in class. So there's a lot of ways we can do this type of stuff, both in class and out of class. All right. So when you're thinking about the flipped classroom, a couple do's and a couple don'ts. First, 3 do's. Do have structure and organization. And again, that goes back to our be structured to be flexible. Do include your own content. And do create visuals. Don't turn your lectures into hour-long videos. That's probably the biggest headache I hear when some instructor comes along and says, yeah, I just created my whole hour-long lesson. I put it online. I mean, I say, well, would you want to watch someone's hour-long lesson? I mean, it's a pretty powerful thing, right? And then also, when you are creating lessons, don't become a talking head. If it's just you on the screen, think about how you can spice it up and make it a little more interesting and engaging. And there's lots of ways you can do that. So I want to go a little more into depth into each of these. So do structure and organization. Why have structure and organization? Well, it allows for the students to feel less stress about the learning environment and allows them more to focus on the learning itself. If they're stressed out about, oh, how do I use this, new tool, or how do I sign up for this new program, or do I have to pay for this thing that came up? Even if they don't, if they fear that stress is going to limit their ability to learn. So there's actually research that's been shown that if we can get people to laugh a little bit, and one thing I do in my class is I get them to teach them how to give the perfect high five. And if you don't know the trick, the key is actually to watch someone else's elbow. Like when you're giving the person you're giving the high five to, you watch their elbow, they watch yours, and you'll get a good solid high five every time. So I have them do that, and they're laughing and they're having fun. And I say, why did we do that? Well, because if we laugh, it reduces our stress level. There was actually a study done where they told people laugh for 60 seconds. They forced them to. And obviously, if I just tell you to laugh, it's going to start out forced. By the end, though, they were laughing for real. And physically and based on like a self-report, their stress level had gone down. They measured their stress level physically by things like their pupil dilation, their breathing, their heart rate, their sweating, and those types of things. And then they said, how stressed do you feel? And just by laughing for 1 minute, their stress level went down. So if we can find ways to reduce their stress, they can focus on their learning, because if they're stressed, they're focused on whatever's stressing them out. So the structure and organization takes away that stress of, oh, what do I have to do now? How do I do this? Because they've done it before. It's structured, it's organized. Every week I do, I watch this video and do this quiz, and I come prepared because of that. Or I take this, look into this PowerPoint and go out and find examples in the real world, or whatever it is. There's that structure and there's that organization. And you can create variety within those things. The videos may be very different every time I do them. They always know they have to watch a video. There's the structure. The variety comes in how I present that video. Another component of this structure and organization is thinking about their comfort zones here. So if we're in our comfort zone, learning's not really happening. It's too easy. If we're way out here in these outside zones, we're panicking, we're stressed out, again, learning's not happening. But if we can get people to step outside of their comfort zone, where they're slightly stressed, but not overwhelmingly stressed, it actually enhances learning and increases retention. Research has shown that we retain information more when we have to actually work for it. If it's too easy, we don't retain it. If we have to actually struggle a little bit, but actually succeed through that struggle, we're more likely to learn it. So get them to step outside of their comfort zone slightly, not too far. We don't want them to panic and shut down. But if we get them to step outside a little bit, the learning will increase. You also want to make sure you're including some of your own content, and that doesn't mean it has to be all your own content. There's things like Khan Academy out there that is a great resource. When I'm teaching APA writing, I go to the Purdue OWL website and use all of their tutorials. They already have this great information, but you need to have a little bit of you as well. Why? Because it provides a humanistic touch. And I put this picture of a tree on here because when I think of humanism, I think of one of the founders of it was a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers. And he said that our development as humans is dependent on relationships. And he used the analogy of a tree. A tree needs air, water, and sunlight to grow. If it misses any of those things, it'll still grow, but it won't flourish as much as it can. And he said that the air is a lot like a genuineness in relationships. The rain or the water is like empathy. So feeling the emotions of other people. And the sunlight is like unconditional positive regard or unconditional love or caring. It's non-judgmental caring. So if we can create that environment for our students via throwing ourselves out there, being there, whether it's via videos, via email connections, via getting involved in discussion boards, wherever there's opportunities, you're providing that humanistic touch in a way where you're non-judgmental towards them, where you're genuine with them, you're showing them what you actually feel, and you're empathetic towards maybe some concerns that came up, because again, they're working adults. They will do much more for you. The student who feels like you care, and by showing these three things, you're showing that you care, will work 10 times harder than the student who's there, for the grade. If they have a connection with their instructor,
Right.
they will work much harder. I'm sure all of you have experienced that, right?
Yep.
Sure. Right.
So again, humanistic touch. Have your own content, but don't be afraid to use other resources. Khan Academy is a big one for me. Open educational resources. If you go to OER Commons, they have a website. There's a lot of stuff out there as well. And then I'm actually in Wisconsin, and we have a free tool, a free database of learning objects and learning activities and games and stuff like that for a variety of resources, and it's called Wisc Online. So you can Google that. You don't have to be in Wisconsin to use it. You can find a ton of learning activities that can help students outside of the classroom. All right.
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, definitely. What questions do you guys have so far on the first couple of the do of structure and organization? Any questions, comments, concerns? All right, silence is, I guess, a good thing. The next do is to.
Can you hear me?
What's that?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I was speaking. One of the things that struck me a little bit when you were speaking was I forgot to mention asking questions. That really helps. Getting opinion or personal information from people to some extent that or their ideas kind of helps as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Again, it's about engaging them, right? So if I'm asking them questions, I'm engaging them. I'm getting them involved. I'm I'm empowering them to be part of the learning process. Definitely. The second do is do create visuals. So I put pictures of an apple here because I like to do a little experiment sometimes where I say, think of an apple, or we'll do a little different here. Let's say, think of a light bulb. Okay? And I'm sure all of you pictured some type of light bulb in your head. You didn't picture the words light and bulb in your head, right? Just like if I say think of an apple, you're going to see some type of image. Okay? Our brain thinks in images. And it's important to create those images, to create those visuals in the environment. So having them just read is not enough. Have them read, have them watch a video, have them make their own diagram, have them do things that allow some visual components, because they're more likely to remember the visuals than they are to remember the words that they read. So how do we do that? There's a lot of free tech tools out there. These are a few that I like to use, and I've used before. Pixlr and BeFunky are both photo editing tools that you can add some unique components to. Toondoo here, and all these are free, by the way, too. Toondoo allows you to create simple cartoons. So I just love to do this when maybe it's an announcement and I want to make it a little different, other than just some words or other than me as a talking head. I might make a cartoon to kind of reinforce a key point. And ThingLink is another pretty cool tool where it allows you to take an image and insert it'll be like little footnotes. So like on this screen here, if I did a ThingLink, I could put a little number here on Pixlr, and it would like pop up a little box that talks more about what Pixlr is. Or maybe I'm analyzing some Van Gogh painting in my art history class, and I could have like, oh, look at what he did here, and analyze these things more in depth. Or maybe it's a writing assignment. Here's a research paper, and you take a screenshot of that research paper and you add these ThingLink components to it. Now,
one thing that I'm
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not overly technical or anything, but one thing that I do to create visuals, like for announcements or whatever, rather than just typing the text in, if you put it in PowerPoint and then save it as a JPEG, you can then load it up so it comes out as more colorful or what have you, and creates a nicer visual than just typing the same thing that you would type within the, kind of the message box.
Definitely. Great idea. Any other comments or thoughts?
Nope.
So one of the first don't was don't create hour or hours long videos. And again, this has to do with the attention span of the students or of any of us. And I put a picture of a flashlight here because I was fortunate enough to work with a professor named Ken Nakamura who shared this very simple analogy with me, but that really stuck in terms of attention. And he said, take a flashlight and put it really close to the wall. And if it's really close to the wall, and as you're visualizing this, you'll think it's small and it's bright. And as you pull it away, it becomes dimmer and wider. And that's how our attention works. Our attention is finite. If we're focused on something, it's really close to the wall, it's small and it's bright. The more things we're trying to pay attention to, or the longer the period of time comes and more distractions start to hit us, the wider and the dimmer that light becomes, the less we're focused. So by creating short videos, you're keeping this flashlight focused on the content and allowing them to adapt. Tools like Zaption as well forces them to re-engage. So if you are going to have to create something a little longer, think about how you can create some soft breaks in there. Some of the best presenters, the on-stage presenters that do these keynotes, they use a lot of soft breaks. And so they're not necessarily saying, okay, let's take a break and we'll come back in 10 minutes. That'd be more of a hard break. But they're doing things like they're shifting, like, okay, let's jump to this video. Oh, let me ask the group questions. Oh, let me bring up another speaker for a few minutes here. And it's just something that just shifts and forces the group to kind of re-engage with what's going on. Oops. So another aspect of this don't create hour-long videos is the importance of practice. Practice makes perfect, and it's important for students to get a chance to take what you presented to them, take that content, do something with it, and get some feedback. And to some extent, that happens in the online environment with when they're doing their actual discussions, assignments, or whatever it is they have to do. And it can happen a lot more in an in-person environment where maybe, hey, do a small group discussion, report back, and then they get some feedback. Or take this quiz and you ought to get some automatic feedback. But give them some opportunity to take that content, chunk that content, and get feedback before they're asked to move on.
That's important. I don't do that enough.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that, and because we want to get through so much. But I always say, if you cover 100% of the material, but they only remember 10% of it, I'd rather cover 70% and have them remember all that 70%.
Right.
Give them that chance to really retain the information.
Right.
So just one other thing, remember, don't become a talking head.
Right.
Okay. It's easy to do though, but when I create videos for my students, sometimes I'm a Mac user, so sometimes I'll use iMovie and create some like more in-depth things, but a lot of times I don't have time for that. So I might just pop up a video and like grab some of my kids' toys and use them as props. Or in a developmental psychology class one day, my 3-year-old wanted to be in my video. So I said, well, that's the age range we happen to be talking about right now. Come on over here, sweetie. And I can just use her as like, hey, as we were talking about it, notice some things that she might be doing, what might be happening here. And I can reference these things. So just find what's around in your environment and be involved that way. If you are going to be a talking head, know that having some animation in your facial expressions and you're using your hands on the screen, those types of things.
Body language.
What's that?
Yeah, the body language.
Body language, right? Yeah, definitely. Use that body language to your advantage.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that I like to use in the PowerPoint is changes of pictures. So the picture change as the philosopher or the religion changes, and you put a few words up there, and then you say, this means that, this means this is the way it works, and you go to another slide. Mm-hmm. So I think that you're changing the picture all along.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. The other thing to keep in mind too, if you are deciding to create videos or PowerPoints or whatever it is they don't have to be perfect. It's so easy as teachers sometimes to say, well, I don't have time to make that the way it needs to be.
Yeah.
It can be good enough. If it gets the content across, it doesn't have to be perfect, video quality, perfect production quality. It's right. About the content and making sure they get what they need to know. Remember, that's what we're focusing on. Some other tech tools that are out there that I like to use from a video perspective, TechSmith, there's like video recording tools. This is not a free one, TechSmith Relay, but it's like it used to be Adobe Connect, things like that. One thing that Chelsea Klein, one of the other directors, recently introduced me to is JoinMe. It's join.me, and it allows you to screen share for free. And so like if you need to walk through something with students, maybe it's how to use this tool on Canvas, they can't find what they need to do, or maybe it's, walking them through, their assignment they did and where they made mistakes. You guys will come together on the screen and you can communicate that way, which is a pretty cool video and audio tool. But also just sometimes the simplest thing to do is the, webcam, pop it on YouTube and send them the link. That's one of the easiest things you can do. From an audio perspective, one easy thing to do is smartphones. They all have a recording device on them. And you can do it. You can send your students out to record things, find examples and record for themselves. What did I see? What was going on? Those types of things to help them remember. It doesn't all have to be just writing it down. There's different ways we can do this. So what tech tools are you guys using and what would you like to learn more about?
What was the one that you just mentioned?
Join.me. I'm gonna pull up our thing here. That's not where I wanted to be. Looks like I missed one here. So we're gonna add it. So I mentioned it's join.me, and I'll pull it up here. And again, this is a free tool. So all you'd have to do is say, start meeting. It'll open up a file for you. Then once that's ready, you download, you click open, and then you start the meeting. You send the link to your student, and it allows you to screen share, just kind of like we're doing here with the webinar. But it's a lot. You don't have to have any kind of fancy tools or fancy, you don't have to pay for anything. It's all free. Are there other tools you guys use that you really like to use that you think are pretty interesting tech tools that others might want to look into?
I've used Jing.
Jing. What else?
Yeah. Screencast.
That's Screencast-O-Matic, that one?
Yeah, that one.
And both of those are screen sharing tools that are, Jing I think is a 5-minute limit and Screencast-O-Matic's like 15. So allows you to present that information in a more visual way. Other tools?
Not for me.
Not for me either.
Gotcha. Well, like I said before, go ahead.
Could be an age thing. I don't know.
There's a lot out there, and it's difficult sometimes too, though, to know like, is this just a bell and whistle, or is it something that's actually going to be useful to me? And that's really a key thing when you're thinking about technology tools. Is it filling a need to benefit my students, or is it just like, wow, this is a cool new thing, I want to try it out? If it's filling a need, go for it. And the other thing I always say, is it free? If it's not free, find something else. There's something free out there that you can use. All right, so the flipped classroom also requires innovation. It requires you to be structured so you can be flexible. It requires variety. It requires innovation as well. If you want to be able to adapt to your students' needs, you have to have that kind of creative mindset to be able to adjust. Next quote I want to mention. This was from someone who I did a training with. She kind of taught me how to take on more of an active approach to teaching, named Deb Walsh. She said, take them where they are and take them where you need them to be. And them is the students. I was always like, well, I have to give them this information, and they're not coming prepared, or they're not doing this. And she said, students are going to come with different experiences, different backgrounds, different levels of preparation for this specific class. It doesn't matter what class you teach, where you teach it at, everyone's going to come in at a different point. So you're going to have to take them all where they are and get them to where you need them to be. And again, it goes back to that beginning point. What's the point I need them to get to when we leave this classroom, or when they leave this course when they're done? And that's what I need to work on. I need to focus on getting everyone to that point. So some things to keep in mind. Not everyone will complete that out-of-class work. Not everyone will understand the out-of-class work at the same level. Not everyone will delve deeply into the content, and not everyone will be at the same point of understanding when they enter the classroom. With that in mind, again, you have to take them where they are and get them where you need to be. And what I've learned is I like to use this model that I call the EAT model. So the way the EAT model works is, in a traditional classroom, we start with the T, which is teach. We teach content. Maybe we go to A, which is apply. We teach, we apply, we test, right? Here I'm saying, let's start with E, which is experience. I want to create an experience for my students. Then I want them to apply, because I don't want to do for the learners what they can do for themselves and each other. And then finally, I'm going to teach. So, for example, when I teach an intro psych class, there's a section where we have to talk about sensation and perception. So I just take the students, and this is in an on-ground class, I take them for a walk through the college. And I say, come back and say, write down everything you experienced. What did you notice? There's the experience. Now the apply is, I asked them the question, was that what you sensed or what you perceived? And we can discuss the difference between the two. And then, what was going on in your eyes, in your ears? Why did you notice, the bathroom over there, and you noticed the cafeteria? Why did you notice that person over there and no one else did? Well, you know that person. How are these things affecting your perception? And I can take all these different concepts related to sensation and perception and apply them and teach based on that one simple experience. So what I've done here is, because they've all come at different levels, I've created my own experience to take them from there to where I need them to be. And I've allowed this collaborative environment, this teaching environment, to get them there. So again, I'm creating experiences. I'm having them do the application. A lot of times I'll have them do it in a think, pair, share model, where I have them individually write down their thoughts, then get into small groups or pairs and share those thoughts. And then we discuss as a large group. That way, everyone in the class had to get involved at least twice before I brought it up to the large group. If I had just brought it up to the large group, I'm probably going to get the same 5 or 6 students sharing every time. The other 15 students might never even thought about it. They might just completely zoned out. They can't do that in the think, pair, share component. And then finally, I teach, where again, I correct, I delve deeper, and I debrief on the content. Any thoughts on this EAT model? Has anybody else used this type of idea, creating experiences, or any concerns or questions you have about how that might work in your class?
I do it more externally, where I may say to them, go to a public place, and I want you to surreptitiously examine people, casually, and look at their nonverbals and try to decipher what's going on in the interaction by the nonverbals. Mm-hmm. But they don't come back directly. They're then writing a paper about it.
Gotcha. Well, there's still that's the experience. There's the application, and the teaching might come in the feedback, right, on the paper. So
the feedback, and also beforehand, obviously.
Gotcha. Anybody else?
Where do you want them to be? would be my question. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah. And that's going to be dependent on what I'm doing that week, right? I want them to be, where I want them to be is what I want them to know when they leave the classroom. What do they need to know? So you're being a philosophy teacher, Peter. I would say, like maybe if you're teaching Socrates, and when they leave this week on Socrates, I need them to know, these things about Socrates, these 3 to 5 big things, because if they don't know those about Socrates, they're not going to know, about Descartes when we get to Descartes. I don't know. I may be completely wrong when I'm saying this stuff, so don't correct me there. But the idea is that they need this to move to the next thing. So what do they really need to know? And I can create an experience that helps them break that down. That's one of my goals here. And if to think about, again, from a philosophy standpoint, if I want them to maybe, think about the differences between Socrates and Descartes, I may present a case study or a scenario and say, how would Socrates look at it? How would Descartes look at it? Or how would this other philosopher look at it? And that having them think about that first at the application level then allows them to engage with this content, to work with it, to practice. And then by teaching that afterwards, that's where that feedback comes in. So remember before we said practice, feedback, practice, feedback. The experience gives them something concrete to connect this content to. So it's not just this abstract key term or abstract theorist, person that lived a long time ago, whatever it is.
Right.
But it's something real that I can connect it to. Did that answer your question?
I don't know. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I don't know if you can do this with philosophy either, but if you could sort of either have them examine things around them and say, where could you apply this? Or did you have an experience where you could have applied this or something along those lines? Sometimes that's the approach, and maybe you could do it in that regard. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other subject that I teach is religion, which is always challenging. Mm-hmm. Because I'm trying to get them to stretch beyond their 4 walls of thinking, and I think the same is true with philosophy. If they can stretch themselves, they'll never go back to the same box again.
Right.
Good point.
But part of that is to interact in the online class and on ground class with other students. As they bounce ideas off one another, then they're like, wow, I never thought of that before. And that's tremendous.
Very true, very true. Any thoughts on how to get them more involved in the online discussions? Because in person, we can use that think, pair, share model. Online, it's a little more tricky. Anybody have good strategies on how to get people discussing online?
The one thing that I ask them to do is not just give me fluff, but actually interact with what the classmate has said. Oh Jill, I really loved how you said blah blah blah. I'm like, that's not interaction. That's just patting her on the back. I want you to tell me something beyond that.
Exactly. And then can help not only just asking them to do that, but also modeling for them, what that looks like when you respond to other students in the class as well. And then, the student who does a good job, point it out.
Right.
There's a pretty powerful component there with the modeling of the behaviors that you want, and then rewarding those behaviors that are positive as well. So.
Right, because he's right. A lot of times in the online classes, you get those students who are just kind of doing the 1-sentence or 2-sentence responses, and they're really not sort of participatory.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So true. They're supposed to put between 100 and 150 words in each response to the classmate, and it shouldn't just be this was wonderful, that was great, you're so insightful. It needs to be deeper than that.
Sure. So they can't have 100 words of compliments, right? So.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
When I see that type of behavior, like in the first week or so, I'll always start with, well, you have the beginning of a good response here, and then get them to add more to it, build from there, and kind of, as you said, model that behavior so that they'll modify and change accordingly.
That's a good way to do it too, because it gives them a little bit of a positive aspect, and then it pushes them past that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can just start with, you have a good point here I'd like to see more of, and then either add something to it and then get them to add more as well.
And what
Right.
you'll find too is, and this is true on ground as well, um, they tend to need more structure and more guidance early in the course. And as they get a feel for your teaching style and what to expect, and the structure of the course itself, you can loosen up the reins a little bit. You can give them a little more freedom, and they will run with it and be more successful. And that's true not only of discussions, but maybe it's presentations or it's specific assignments. If you give them enough positive feedback early on that shows them what you want, and then also that those corrections, then it helps them figure out how to adjust in this environment, and you won't have to provide as much feedback later on. So
Very good.
yeah,
Very
the
true.
flipped classroom, we're getting close to our end here, but the flipped classroom also requires some adaptability. You have to be able to adjust, because it does require active learning to take place. It's not just I'm going to talk about this for 2 hours, but it's I might talk about this for 20 minutes, but then I have to do something else, and I have to adjust, and I have to adapt. So the last quote I want to talk about, the fifth quote: when you plant lettuce, if it does not grow well, you do not blame the lettuce. You look for reasons it is not doing well. It may need fertilizer or more water or less sun. You never blame the lettuce. And that's from Buddhist philosopher Thich Nhat Hanh. And that's, think about that for your students. If they're not learning, we don't. If it's lettuce isn't growing, we don't blame the lettuce. If the student's not learning, a lot of times we say, well, they're not. It's their fault. They're not trying hard enough. They're not doing this. And there may be some truth to that. But
Yeah, when they're on
what
their
you can,
cell phones in class.
yeah, that's true. But what you can control is you, right? I can't make my student go home and read that book, but I can create an environment in the classroom where they want to learn, where they enjoy, where they're engaged, where they understand by design, rather than just getting frustrated because they don't do it. So focus on what you can control, which is you, and take them where they are and take them where you need them to be. Any other comments, questions, thoughts on how maybe you'd start to flip your classroom?
Anybody? I can chime in.
Great.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I think I'm going to take some of your concepts of more of the practicing in groups and the feedback kind of thing. I'm not very good at orchestrating. I can orchestrate a dinner party, but orchestrating the class in that regard is not my strong point. So I'm going to try that a little bit more. And I know I do engage in all of the other things you mentioned, but I think also enhancing the learning environment a little bit more would probably be a positive thing.
And I like the idea of requiring the students to actually address one another online. This is the online class. Because as they really draw out the other students, that's when I think you're going to get them engaged.
Yes, that too.
Not just filling up the page with 100 or 150 words, but actually thinking through what the other students have said.
Yeah, I'm going to do that based on what you said as well.
I think that's great, and then also taking that and getting them to apply the information to personal, academic, professional ways that they can then relate it. So I think that will help them really get like what you're trying to get from the class, the objectives that you really want them to learn.
Definitely. I mentioned that EAT model, and it starts with an experience, and they apply to that experience. And then I teach. What I didn't talk about, just for time reasons, was usually after that I get them again to apply it in a new way. They've applied it to that experience, but I want them to apply it, like you said, to themselves, Kathy. I want them to apply it personally, professionally, something that they can connect to in another way, because it's one thing to be able to apply to the experience I created, but can you think about how this relates to other aspects of the real world? And that's that important part of those perspectives that Peter was talking a lot about too. So, any other questions or comments or thoughts before we start to finish up here?
Just one last thing. I liked all the tools that you presented, and I'm going to look at using those is there anything that you would recommend in terms of students talking to one another? Is there a way for them to do that beyond the comment or the discussion on the online classes?
Great
right, because
question.
the rubrics,
Yeah.
I get it, because the rubrics sometimes state, you know, student had 3 responses or 4 responses, and they're doing these sort of pat responses, so I get that.
Yes.
You know, I don't. My first thought goes to like creating, you know, a Google Doc that they can share, or a wiki, or a blog, or something that they can take beyond the environment. But you know, it is somewhat limiting in that online environment. Another thought goes to they can create their own. You know, instead of having a typed discussion, there is the, you know, if you're okay with it in the lesson, having them record themselves and putting that up as a video thing, because that adds that personal touch as well from a student perspective. You know, I watch someone else talk about their thoughts on this rather than just reading them. Those are a couple options, but I think that's an excellent question. It's a difficult one that I don't have a good answer to right now.
Because the classes are preset, perhaps one of the ways is just email them or put an announcement out in advance of that discussion, and state that you really want the responses to other students to be more comprehensive, and kind of find a way to exemplify that to some extent.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think what Trey was saying was modeling.
Yeah.
Model for them what you want them to see.
Exactly. Yeah, provide an example.
Right. Good point.
Any other last thoughts before we finish up?
I do like the concept of the, I'll just say the where you said with the visuals, the think about. I wrote that down because I do use a lot of visuals, and I like the concept more of, rather than just say a particular slide, that showing images and saying, see how these images symbolize something. It might be more, what does this symbolize to you? Showing one image of it, what does this symbolize, and then talking about it. What does this symbol? How does this communicate to you? How is it communicated in history? Like a Nazi symbol, things along those lines. Like that to me now is more interesting.
Definitely. Cool. Great.
Very good.
Kathy, did you have
good.
a last comment? It looked like you were going to jump in for a second there.
No, I kind of was going to say what she said, so that's fine.
Okay, great. Well, thank
Sorry,
you all.
I didn't take over.
No problem.
Well, thank you all for
Thank you.
attending. Like I said,